Just 5 years after India gained independence, a telegram arrived that stunned the nation's sporting community. It came from FIFA, the governing body of world football, inviting India to participate in the 1950 World Cup in Brazil. It was more than just a sports invitation. It was a symbol, a statement that newly independent India could now step onto a global stage, not as a colony, but as a competitor. For many in Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta, it felt like a dream too bold to be real. India's football team wasn't world famous, but they had made international headlines 2 years earlier at the 1948 London Olympics. There, the barefoot Indian players, yes, barefoot, lost narrowly to France in a match that won admiration from across Europe. That game sparked something, the idea that India might one day rival the great footballing nations. Reporters praised their skill. British crowds, still adjusting to a post-colonial world, stood and applauded their grace. And now, with Brazil hosting the first World Cup since the war, India was offered a direct spot in the tournament. No qualifiers, no waiting. The All India Football Federation wasn't prepared, not logistically, not financially, and certainly not psychologically. Government support was minimal. Sponsors were non-existent. Even basic resources like passports and visas were a challenge in post-colonial bureaucracy. Just pack, train, and go. But what followed wasn't celebration. It was confusion. Meetings behind closed doors, hesitations, internal squabbles. Others claimed it was out of protest, or pride, or principle. The idea of sending a full squad across the globe, outfitting them with travel gear, equipment, medical staff. Within weeks, hope turned into hesitation, and it fit a certain narrative of a proud, traditional team being shunned by a rigid Western institution. It vanished almost as suddenly as it appeared. Only a few players remained fully barefoot. The rest wore makeshift boots or wrapped their feet in bandages. And that's when the rumors began. Their only concern was safety and standardization, not colonial condescension. They pulled out because FIFA banned them from playing barefoot, some whispered. The real reasons were far messier and far more revealing. Some wanted to send the team no matter what. Others feared the costs, the preparation, and the possibility of humiliation on a global stage. And eventually, the Federation sent a message FIFA didn't expect. There was no unified strategy, no roadmap, and no budget. By the time FIFA finalized the team list for the 1950 World Cup, India's name was no longer there, and with that silence came speculation. In newspapers and sports columns, a single explanation began to dominate. India was banned for wanting to play barefoot. It was simple, memorable. But there was one problem. It wasn't true. FIFA had never explicitly banned barefoot play in the 1950 tournament. In fact, during the 1948 Olympics, the Indian team had already started to transition. It stuck. It was exotic. It was easier to digest than the uncomfortable truth. More importantly, FIFA's invitation had no special clause about footwear. So why did the barefoot myth spread? Because the truth was harder to face. Behind the scenes, India's football administrators were fractured. When FIFA asked for confirmation, India delayed. They requested financial aid. They asked for deadline extensions. They even suggested sending a mixed squad, part professional, part amateur. But time was running out. India would not be attending. The fallout was quiet, almost hushed. No public announcement, no formal explanation, just a slow retreat from the spotlight. And that is when no one knows exactly who offered the barefoot story to a Western journalist, that India hadn't been disrespected. They had hesitated, and in the world of international sport, hesitation is often fatal. In Brazil, the 1950 World Cup opened with samba, sun, and spectacle. The world watched as giants like Brazil, Uruguay, and Sweden clashed in packed stadiums. There were no TV broadcasts, no highlight reels, and limited international press in India. Most citizens never knew just how close their country had come to walking onto football's biggest stage. But for India, the tournament was indeed just a missed opportunity. It became a symbol of what could have been. Back home, only a handful of people understood the gravity of the moment. Mohammed Salim, one of India's early football legends, called the decision a betrayal of belief. Sailen Manna, who would have captained the team, never spoke publicly about the withdrawal, but teammates said he was crushed. But for those inside the sport, the decision echoed like a warning. Indian players, many of whom had trained for months in anticipation, were devastated. Instead, Indian football entered a slow drift toward obscurity, even as cricket soared to national dominance. The missed World Cup wasn't just about prestige, it was about trajectory. Had India played, even lost, the nation might have invested earlier in infrastructure, stadiums, coaching, youth development, a place in global rankings. Meanwhile, the barefoot myth evolved into folklore. For Asia, a continent barely represented in international football, India's withdrawal was more than a personal loss. It was a regional heartbreak. It wasn't measured in goals. In classrooms and casual conversations, generations grew up believing India was unfairly banned. It became a tale of defiance, noble, even heroic. Japan was still recovering from the war. China's civil conflict had splintered its footballing structure. Southeast Asia lacked the infrastructure. The narrative, whether intentional or not, was cemented. Football belonged to Europe and South America. The rest of the world, background noise. India, by contrast, had a federation, an Olympic performance, and a roster of talented, fearless players. But that version removed accountability. It ignored the disorganization, the fear of failure, and the internal divisions that really caused the pullout. Could have shown that, barefoot or not, Asian football had a place in the global conversation. And the cost, it was measured in decades of sponsors, schools, media, they all shifted focus. Talented young athletes, inspired by India's 1983 Cricket World Cup win decades later, chose the bat over the ball. Historians tiptoed around it. It didn't fit the narrative of post-colonial pride. It revealed flaws, institutional, psychological, and logistical, that many preferred to forget. Football faded into weekend matches and forgotten stadiums. It was lost in indecision, inertia, and missed opportunity. It's a tale too convenient to die, too cinematic, but the truth reveals something deeper. Not until 2022 did India finally host a FIFA tournament, and even then, only for youth. There's no statue, no plaque, no official record of the moment India turned away from football history, just silence and myth. The senior men's team has never played in a World Cup, because once the window to the World Cup shut, it didn't open again for a long, long time. The passion never died, but the pipeline, it never recovered. And perhaps it all traces back to that fateful telegram, an invitation, quietly declined. They're rejecting the old myths. They're asking hard questions. Why haven't we played a World Cup match? Why did we walk away? As India's World Cup hopes faded into paperwork and missed deadlines, the shockwaves extended far beyond Delhi. India was, at the time, Asia's brightest hope. No other Asian team had been invited to the World Cup. When India pulled out, the message to the world was inadvertently clear. Asia wasn't ready. FIFA didn't extend another invitation to an Asian nation until years later. And it wasn't just geopolitics, it was momentum. A single tournament could have sparked investment, could have ignited fan culture. Instead, India became a cautionary tale. Within a decade, cricket's rise began to eclipse football entirely, and yet, the story remained buried. Leaders rarely brought it up, but the truth was clear. India didn't need boots. It needed belief. And when the moment came, that belief wavered. The World Cup wasn't lost on the pitch. Decades later, when Indian football officials are asked about the 1950 World Cup, many still shift uncomfortably in their seats. The barefoot story still circulates, repeated in interviews, documentaries, even textbooks, that India wasn't denied a seat at the table. It left the table before the meal began. And that choice reshaped a sport in the subcontinent for generations. Football became the game of almost, of could have, of what if. Today, in a country of over 1 billion people, the football dream flickers in corners, in schoolyards, in dusty tournaments, in regional leagues that battle for airtime against cricket's spotlight. Still, some believe the story isn't over. A new generation fueled by internet access, global leagues, and local pride is rediscovering the game. They deserve real answers. Because history isn't just what we celebrate, it's what we learn from. And in the case of 1950, the lesson is sharp. In football, like in life, opportunity rarely knocks twice. When it does, you don't ask it to wait.